Sometimes a tattoo is nothing more than a weekend in Vegas and a few too many drinks. Other times a tattoo means much more, good and bad. Throughout life, we've all been tattooed with labels that can become our identity. But God gives us a new name and a new identity. The world has written us shamed, damaged, and worthless. God has written innocent, glorious, and beloved. What have you let the world tattoo on you? And where does God want to do some new art?
Well, good morning. We're glad that you're here this morning. It's good to see all of you. We are in week 2 of a 4-week series called Tattooed. Last week, we laid the foundation for this message series, which is that we allow the world to label us with certain labels, identities, and if we're not careful, we tend to live into those labels or the identities instead of who God says we are. It was a good foundation to start to lay, and so if you missed it last week, I would encourage you to go back and catch it. You can get it at aldersgate.online. The next 3 weeks in this message series, we're going to start going at specific labels that we feel like God really wants us to address and talk about. In doing that with this series, we've got something different going on here at the church on Sunday mornings. The tattoo shop that you saw there in the video is EDOC here in town. And Xavier, one of the artists there, is with us this morning. We've got an artist with us every Sunday morning. And we're taking some of you who shared your stories with us, and we're doing some cover-up tattoos on Sunday morning. So whether it's a scar, some of you have tattoos that story of when you got the tattoo no longer really represents who you are, and you want to change that. And so just something to visibly represent what God does in our lives and what we're talking about in this series. So this morning, we've got 2 people. One has already had theirs done in the first hour. Princess Nelson had a scar from a chemo port from breast cancer, which she's now cancer-free, but she doesn't like looking at that scar. She wants a new story, and so she had a tattoo covered up over that scar. And then right now, I think they were getting set up. I don't know if it started yet or not, but Stephanie Johnson is getting a tattoo on her forearm. Let me tell you the story. She lost her husband 3 years ago, and after losing her husband, she battled severe anxiety and depression. And she would have anxiety attacks that were so severe that when she had them, she would pick at the skin on her forearm, which left some terrible scars. God's healing her, delivering her from that anxiety, and she wants to share a new story and have those scars covered up. And so her work's going to be done during the 10:15 and the 11:30 service today. Again, it's just a visual representation of what God does in our lives, as he takes the labels that the world, that we let family, friends, whoever put on us, and God says, no, that's not who I say you are. This morning, we're going to tackle one of those specifically. To get to it, we're going to start with the test. Y'all all right with that? One person is excited about taking a test. This is a fill-in-the-blank test. You guys like fill-in-the-blank? There's no word bank, so you can fill in the blank with whatever you want to, all right? This is a fill-in-the-blank test from every college professor out there. Are you ready? The blank is the blank that the blank is blank. Yeah? How many of you have had a teacher or a college professor who liked to test that way? Yeah, no word bank. They just expect you to know all this stuff. I'm not that hard. It's going to be much easier. Check this out. To blank or not to blank? So turn to your neighbor and fill in the blank, all right? Let them know what the blank should be. What do you got? To be or not to be? See, this is easy. I knew you could do it. Next one, here we go. Be the blank you want to see in the world. Turn to your neighbor, fill in the blank. A Gandhi quote. All right, what is it? Be the change that you want to see in the world. All right, but let's do something really fun here. Turn to your neighbor and fill in the blank with another word other than change, all right? So just really quickly fill in the word with a blank with another word. All right, same thing. I'm going to give you the next one. You all know this. Life is a box of no. Fill it in with another word, all right? Turn to your neighbor, fill in the blank with another word. Life is a box of no cussing. You can't use cuss words on Sunday morning. Life is a box of. All right. Here's my favorite one. The Dallas Cowboys are. So we all know the correct answer is God's team, right? Yeah. We also know that even God is disappointed these days, but we're getting there, all right? Here's another one. Life would be better if, fill in the blank. Turn to your neighbor. Oh, it got quiet all of a sudden. Why do you yell at me when I talk about the Dallas Cowboys? But when I want to talk to you about your life, you get quiet. Life is better if, fill in the blank. Some of you are like, life is be better if the Dallas Cowboys would win. Yeah, all right. Life would be better if, here's another one. I'll never be blank enough. Fill in the blank. Turn to your neighbor and fill in the blank. Don't tell your neighbor they will never be blank enough. Say, I will never be blank enough. One more. I'll be worthy when. Fill in the blank. Where we're going this morning is that we have a never enough problem. Not worthy enough problem. And we've let the world sell this to us. We've let people tell us these things, that I am never going to be tall enough or smart enough or powerful enough or rich enough or successful enough. I'll be worthy when I get married. I'll be worthy when I get that promotion. I'll be worthy when I get a job. I'll be worthy when I get my college diploma. I'll be worthy when my kids behave. Some of you are like, that ain't happening, right? But that's the thing, is that we've got this problem, this never enough. See, that's the label that we've let the world tattoo on us. If you are honest with yourself this morning, you will sit here and answer that question, never blank enough. Or I'll be worthy when. Because someone, somewhere has told you you'll never be blank enough. Somewhere, someone has told you that you would have worth when. It may have been very out in the open. It may have been something that you insinuated from the way you live in the world. The bottom line is, if you're honest with yourself, you know you've got a never enough problem. A few months ago, we did a sermon series here at Aldersgate called Anxious for Nothing. And as part of that sermon series, we did this exercise where we had a trash can up here on the platform, and you had sheets of paper in your seats, and we wanted you to write down on those sheets of paper something that you were anxious about, something that you were worried about, something that kept you up at night. And you wrote those things on those pieces of paper, and then we said, all right, wad them up, throw them away, get rid of them. And so you brought them up here, you put them in the trash can. I spent some time going through every single one of those papers so that I could pray for us as a church. Your names weren't on them. What it also showed me is where God wanted us to preach. Because over and over and over, as I opened up those pieces of paper, I'm anxious about not being a good enough dad. I'm anxious about not being a good enough wife. I'm anxious about not being a good enough teacher. I'm worried that I'm not doing my marriage right. I'm worried that I'm not raising my kids right. I'm worried that I'm not following Jesus enough. All of these things of I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy enough. And so we've tried to hit on that a couple of times since that, and that's where we're coming to in this message, week 2 of Tattooed this morning, is to help us look at our never enough problem. If you're honest, you know you have it. And I've got good news for you. You're in good company. Not just because there's 300 people that sit here with you this morning that are also not good enough or never enough or worthy enough, but because there's lots of people in the Bible who were not enough. There's lots of people in the Bible who were not worthy. We can start at the beginning with Moses. Moses was God's man who was called to lead his people out of slavery in Egypt. God said, Moses, I want you to lead my people out of slavery. Come on, you're the man. And Moses said in Exodus chapter 3, verse 11, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? Who am I? We've all been there. We understand what Moses is saying. Well, I'm not qualified. I'm not tall enough. I'm not smart enough. I haven't been married long enough. I've been divorced. I'm not enough. Who am I that I should be able to do that? In fact, Moses was so insistent with God in chapter 4, verse 13, he said, Lord, just send somebody else. I'm not your guy. The prophet Isaiah, the same thing. Isaiah chapter 6, verse 5. He's in the very presence, the literal presence of God, and here's what he says. Woe to me. Come on now, you've said that. Woe may not be in your vocabulary, but you said, God, poor me. Have pity on me. Oh, wouldn't the world just look at me and see how bad I have it? We've all been there. We can resonate with Isaiah. We can resonate with Jeremiah, the other prophet, or another prophet, Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 6. God's calling him to speak these messages to his people, and Jeremiah says, I do not know how to speak because I'm only a youth. Too young, too old. I don't have the degree. I don't have any experience. We can come up with all these excuses, you fill in the blank, but we can resonate with what Jeremiah says. Luke chapter 3, verse 16, moving on to the New Testament. This is John the Baptist, the one who was born before Jesus. It was going to be the forerunner for Jesus. He's baptizing all these people like crazy. And in Luke chapter 3, verse 16, he says, I baptize you with water, but he who is mightier than I is coming, the strap of whose sandals I am not worthy to untie. He will baptize you with the Holy Spirit and fire. Did you catch that? He said, I am not worthy. I'm not worthy. That Greek word there is hikonos, which means not sufficient enough, or it means sufficient enough. And John the Baptist is saying, I'm not sufficient enough. I'm not sufficient in ability. You've been there, you lived there because the world tells you that. You can resonate with that. You can resonate with the centurion a couple of chapters later in Luke 7, 6. The centurion was a Roman officer who was in charge of 100 troops. His daughter had fallen ill, and he summoned Jesus to come and heal her. And in verse 6 of chapter 7, we get that when they were not far from the house, the centurion sent friends saying to Jesus, Lord, don't trouble yourself, for I am not worthy. Hikonos, sufficient in ability. I'm not enough to have you even come under my roof. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 9, this is Paul, who wrote over half of the New Testament. Paul says, for I am the least of the apostles, unworthy to be called an apostle because of what I've done, because of my past, because of how the world still wants to label me. Come on, you can resonate with this. These aren't people who are mythical to us. These aren't people who we don't have anything in common with. We understand Moses. We understand Isaiah. We understand Jeremiah. We get John the Baptist. We get the centurion. We get Paul. Because we too have felt like we're never enough, that we don't measure up, that we don't have the worth the world tells us that we need. There's another character. In fact, if you've got a Bible this morning, I'd encourage you to turn there. If you're not, just pull out a phone, or you can reach down there in the seats in front of you and grab a Bible. Luke chapter 5. Most of you are familiar with this character. His name is Peter. In the story today, he's referred to as Simon because Jesus hadn't changed his name yet. Peter, one of the 12 apostles that Jesus called to follow him for 3 years. In Luke chapter 5, we get the story of the beginning of his calling. When we read these 11 verses today, because I'm going to read all 11 of them so you can get the entire story, I want you to pick up on the place that Peter felt he wasn't enough. He felt he wasn't worthy enough. First, Luke chapter 5, verse 1. On one occasion, while the crowd was pressing in on him, this is Jesus, to hear the word of God, he was standing by the lake of Gennesaret. And he saw 2 boats by the lake, but the fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. Getting into one of the boats, which was Simon's, he asked him to put out a little from the land, and he sat down and taught the people from the boat. And when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, this is Peter, Put out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch. Come on, we can all resonate with Peter here. And Peter answered him, Master, we've already been there. We've already done that. We've been doing this all night and we've caught nothing. But at your word, I will let down the nets. And when they had done this, they enclosed a large number of fish and their nets were breaking. And watch, they were this big, okay? You fishermen didn't even get that. They signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and filled both of the boats so that they began to sink. There were so many fish that the boats began to sink. But when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord. For he and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken. And so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, Do not be afraid. From now on you will be catching men. And when they had brought their boats to land, they left everything and followed him. Did you see the point where Peter knew he wasn't enough? Where he knew he could never add up, where he knew he wasn't worthy enough, where even some of those who were there that day said, I told you so. I knew you'd never be good enough. I knew you could never do it. And in that moment, Peter chooses to do something very powerful, which is something that all of us can learn from today. You see, Peter chose in that moment when he knew he wasn't enough, when the world was going to label him as not being enough, not being able to measure up, not being worthy enough, he chose to do one thing, and that one thing was this. He confessed it. He fell down on his face at Jesus' knees and said, I'm not enough. I'll never be worthy enough. All of these things that people have said about me, they're true. I'll never measure up, never add up, never be good enough. You see, here's the thing. Peter could have chosen to do something else, which is, I think, by default, what most of us, including myself, choose to do. Instead of confessing, we choose to compare. You see, what Peter could have done, I don't see this in Luke chapter 5, but what he could have done is after the catch, he could have looked over at James and John, who were in the other boat, and gone, oh, they have more fish than I do. And look at their boat. Their boat is nicer than my boat. Come to think of it, their house is nicer than my house. And their donkeys are smarter than my donkeys. Isn't that what we do? Isn't that why we feel like we're not enough? Because we look at what everybody else has, and all of a sudden we don't have enough. We look at other people's success, and all of a sudden we're not successful enough. We look at other people's power, and all of a sudden we're not powerful enough. We look at other people's kids and how they behave, and all of a sudden we suck at this job. Come on, you're with me on this, right? Comparison will always tell us we're not enough. Look, we can get into this game, we can play this game all we want, but here's what we do. We trade in our boat, go buy a new boat. Guess what? Somebody else has a bigger boat. We trade in our house, we go buy a new house. Guess what? Somebody has a bigger house. We trade in our kids, go get new kids. Guess what? Somebody else's kids still behave better. We can play that game all day long. We can compare and compare and compare. And in comparison, at the end of the day, it always, always, always tells us we're not enough. Always. Oh, here's the other thing we can do to compare. I don't see this in Luke chapter 5, but Peter could have done this as well. He could have looked at James and John and goes, yeah, they've got more fish than I do, but mine are bigger. He could have looked at James and John and gone, yeah, they've got more fish than I do, but Jesus is in my boat. Because isn't that what we also do? When we start playing the comparison game, we look at somebody else. We start thinking, I'm not a good parent, but not doing as bad as they are. I haven't been a good husband lately, but I could write a book compared to that guy. Isn't that what we do? We compare. And we even get to the place when we play that comparison game where we start talking critically or negatively about other people to make ourselves look better. Some of you are like, well, you don't really deal with this. You're a pastor. You know, I'm going to tell you something. Churches are the worst about this. You can always look at another church and go, well, they've got more people. Other people have more money. Well, they do discipleship better. They do outreach better. Their people don't complain on Facebook as much. I mean, we can look and compare ourselves all day long. Peter didn't compare. He confessed. When Peter knew he was broken, when Peter knew he didn't add up, when Peter knew he wasn't the best fisherman, the best Christ follower, he got down on his face and said, Jesus, here's who I am. And here's the other thing he did. He said, I know who you are. He said, I know who you are. You are the Christ. You are the one who is always worthy. You are the one who is always good enough. You are the one who is never lacking. It's like the words from Revelation chapter 5, verse 12. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and wealth and wisdom and might and honor and glory and blessing. Peter might as well have echoed those words on his face at the knees of Jesus. Paul, the one who earlier said, I am not worthy enough because of my past. Here's what he said in Philippians chapter 2, verses 9 through 10. He said, therefore God has highly exalted him, who? Jesus. That at that name, the name that is above every name, every knee should bow and every tongue confess. Even Paul is saying, man, I don't have it all together. My past disqualifies me. But because of who Jesus is, I will fall at his knees, confess my brokenness, and say, you are enough. Peter recognized that Christ was enough. In the fact that he wasn't enough, Christ was enough. And there's something very powerful that happens in that moment of confession. You will never find this in comparison, but you will always find it in confession. And you know what Peter found? You know what Paul found in that confession? They found this, that because they cried out and said, I am not enough, but Christ is enough, they found out that they were enough in Christ. Come on, man, that's good stuff. Just don't sit there. In their brokenness, they learned that they were made whole because Jesus made them whole. In their comparison, they learned that they didn't have to do that because all they had to do was look to one person, and that is Jesus, who said they were enough. Listen, there's scriptures about it. Write these down. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8. Paul says, for by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not your own doing. It is the gift of God. Let me paraphrase that for Paul. You will never be good enough to earn it. You can never do enough things to be worthy enough. So you can choose to walk in the world and let them throw insults at you and hurl tattoos at you that say, not enough, not worthy. Or you can confess at the feet of Jesus and say, thank you for your grace, who says I'm enough. He said it this way in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 5. Not that we are sufficient, that's that word hikanos again. Not that we are sufficient, not that we are enough in ourselves to claim anything is coming from us, but our enoughness, our sufficiency is from God. Listen to me, it doesn't matter where you're broken today. It doesn't matter where you feel like you're not enough. It doesn't matter where you've been told you're not enough. It doesn't matter where you feel like you're not worthy. It doesn't matter where you've been told you're not worthy. Because Christ is enough, you are enough. Because Christ is worthy, you are worthy. Look, I want you to look at Peter's story because we're not done in Luke chapter 5. He chose to confess. He didn't compare. He just chose to fall down at the feet of Jesus and confess. And then Jesus said to him, follow me. Put down your fishing nets. You're no longer going to fish for fish. You're going to fish for men. Follow me. Now, I want you to think about this for a second. I suspect that in that moment, Peter probably felt like he was enough more than he had at any other time in his life. That was probably the most successful fishing outing he had ever had. Right? For those of you who play golf, it's like when you play 18 holes and you have that one shot that keeps you playing that stupid game over and over and over again. This was the one shot that told Peter, I'm going to keep fishing. I can do this. I'm not a loser. I'm not poor. I'm not an outcast. I can do this. He probably felt more worthy and more enough at that point than he ever had in his entire life. And Jesus said, leave it all behind. Give it up and follow me. And he did. He left it all behind. And I wish I could tell you from that day forward, Peter never struggled with being enough again. But he didn't. There came a time, days, months later, Jesus was teaching 5,000 people, more than 5,000, probably more like 15,000. The disciples were like, send them home, let them get something to eat. Jesus said to the disciples, you feed them. What did the disciples, including Peter, say? We don't have enough. Remember the conversations that Peter had with James and John and the other disciples about who was the greatest? Who's going to get to sit at your right hand, Jesus? Who's got more than enough among all of us? Who's worthy enough among all of us? Remember when Jesus told Peter he would deny him 3 times? And Peter said, no, I'm enough. I will never do that. And sure enough, before the sun came up the next morning, he had denied Jesus 3 times. I wish I could tell you that Peter never struggled with being enough again. But what I can tell you is that every time Peter struggled with being enough, you know what he did? He confessed. He confessed. He said, I'm sorry, I'm not enough. I'm not enough. There's a similar story at the end of John's gospel, John chapter 21. Peter went fishing again. Jesus was crucified. He was put in the tomb. On the 3rd day, he rose again. He stays on the earth for 40 days. He shows up a couple of times. The disciples are confused. They have no idea what to do, what direction to go, what's happening in their life. Peter says, I'm going fishing. Oh my gosh. Jesus shows up on the beach. They have a miraculous catch of fish. Jesus reinstates Peter again and says, Peter, do you love me? Yes. Feed my sheep? Yeah. Does that all? And then he says, Peter, you're going to die. Because you've given up everything to follow me, you're going to die. You're going to be a martyr. You're going to die. And Peter, you know what Peter did? Poor Peter. He played the comparison game. He looked at John and said, well, what about him? I swear, John chapter 21. What about him? Jesus said to Peter, Peter, what is that to you? What does it matter to you about John? What does it matter to you what I've called him to? What does it matter to you what's going to happen with his life? What does it matter to you? You see what Jesus is saying to Peter? The same thing he's saying to us. What does it matter how much money other people have? What does it matter how good at parenting they are? What does it matter how good at being a husband or a wife they are? What does it matter about what kind of degree they have? What does it matter about what kind of car they drive or what house they live in? What matters is, are you following me and confessing the places you're broken and trying to do everything you can to avoid letting the labels that the world wants to stick on you. And just know that in me, you are enough because I am enough. Listen, I know that there are a lot of you who sit there this morning. You came in here this morning. Some of you didn't even want to walk through the doors because you didn't feel like you were enough. That whatever it is you're caught up in now, whatever's happening in your life, you didn't feel worthy. Others of you came to the doors because you're used to going through the motions, but if you're honest with yourself this morning, you'll confess that you think you're not enough, that you don't measure up, your parenting's not been good, being a husband or wife's not been good, you haven't been a good boss, you haven't been a good employee, you're not enough. Here's what I want you to do this morning. I just want you to close your eyes. And I want you to give that place, or those places where you feel like you're not enough, to Jesus. Listen, in your mind's eye, do exactly what Peter did. Fall on your face and confess. There are places that you've been trying to live up to someone's expectations. There are places that you have let the world tell you you're not enough, you're not worthy, or life would just be better if. And at the feet of Jesus, he just wants to whisper over you this morning, am I enough? Jesus is saying to you this morning, am I enough? Do you really believe I'm enough? And if you believe I'm enough, then you are enough. While you're at the feet of Jesus, you might as well go ahead and confess to him the places you've been comparing yourself to others. You might as well go ahead and let him know why you think you're not enough. You might as well go ahead and confess to him the places that you've been tearing other people down to make yourself look enough. And in that confession, in that place of posturing yourself before Jesus, just don't get up until you hear him say, you are enough. The band's gonna sing a song about being slaves and how God delivers us from that place of bondage, from that captivity. Listen, if you are kneeling at Jesus' feet this morning and you are confessing the place where you feel you are not measuring up, where you are not enough, where you are not worthy enough, he is delivering you from that bondage at this very moment. He's delivering you from that place where you're held captive, where you are a slave. And so when you hear him say, you are enough, then you stand and you sing with all you've got. I'm gonna ask our prayer team to come to the front this morning, to come to the altar. They'll be here. If you need anybody to pray over you or to pray with you about anything, then just come find one of them. They're normally in the back at the prayer corner, but I'm gonna ask them to come to the front this morning. And so if you're here on the prayer team, just come to the front. If you need anything, come see one of them. Let them pray with you. Don't get up from Jesus' feet until you know you are enough.